English translation, 397th contact, Monday, 8th of August 2005, 2:07 hours.
Unfortunately, it was a bit late today, Edouard, because I was still busy with some foresights, which I will tell you later. Salome and be greeted.
I too offer you my greetings. It is no problem for me that you are only coming now, because even now we can still talk about some things. If you do not have anything urgent, I would like to ask you to answer a few questions in more detail than was the case in the past, when we only talked about it superficially.
There is nothing of urgency, except that I want to hand over to you this work here, which we would like you to do for us. If I can explain it to you briefly.
Understood. That should not be a problem. It will probably be ready by the end of this week, so you can take it with you when you come in for correction work. So then my questions. In the 80s, it must have been 1987, Ketzel once mentioned in passing that there was a so-called clean explosive that could be made from sand. What should I understand by this?
It is an explosive that is actually made from sand and is therefore inexhaustible. The substance that must be extracted from sand is called silicon, a pebble product that is bound in sand as well as in most rocks and minerals. It is made of an acid-resistant, black-gray, and very shiny semi-metal or hard and brittle crystal with a diamond structure. On Earth, silicon is the chemical element designated by the symbol Psi and has the atomic number 14 and a relative atomic mass of 28.0855. It has a density of 2.328 gcm3 and a melting point of 1,410 degrees Celsius and a boiling point of 2,477 degrees Celsius. Silicon is an element from the fourth main group of the periodic table of the chemical elements, and in its purest form, an electrical semiconductor, whose conductivity is increased even further if small additions of elements from the third or fifth group are added to it. However, these data are known to earthly scholars and can also be found in encyclopedias. But what now has to be said with regard to the explosive you mentioned is this. If the silicon is slightly changed in its structure, I am not allowed to officially mention the how method as a result of our directives. Then a very strong explosive can be obtained from it, which develops a much higher blasting speed than, for example, dynamite, which has a blasting speed of about 8.5 seconds. Silicon explosives are also clean explosives, which do not produce dangerous residues. And what is very important with this explosive? It has no uncontrollable, broad destructive effect, but can be limited to the millimeter in terms of the effective area, and can also be used with extreme precision.
An ideal explosive, you might say. Then I have a question regarding water. Quetzal once said, unfortunately also not in detail, that water is constantly revitalized by the electromagnetism of the Earth, which is the reason why water remains healthy and in biological balance. Now the question, can electromagnetism generated by human machines and apparatuses, etc. also influence water in such a manner that, for example, diseased waters such as lakes, streams, and rivers, etc. become healthy again? Something in this context Quetzal said. This has nothing to do with so-called levitated water, as he said.
What Quetzal said is correct. Through earthly electromagnetism, the water on and in the earth is revitalized and kept healthy and in biological balance. And indeed, it is true that through additional electromagnetism, the water quality is greatly improved, and much more can be revitalized and built up, and its intelligence can be promoted. Water actually shows its own intelligence, which is fundamentally given, which can be addressed and increased by electromagnetism. It should also be noted that the surface tension of water changes depending on the strength of the electromagnetism with which the water is processed, improved, and revitalized. The stronger the electromagnetism, the lower the surface tension. The whole thing, however, requires a very specific process, because only through this process is a real change in the water achieved in an enlivening manner. And this process of electromagnetism has nothing to do with a levitating of the water, which must not be associated with levitation. Levitating is a process based on the delusion that the quality of water can be increased by certain stirring rituals or by purely electrical influence on the water, etc.
I have another question regarding homeopathy. You said that homeopathic remedies are only effective as long as there are still enough active ingredients in them. But many people say that they or their animals have recovered through homeopathic products.
I have talked about this at length, because in fact such remedies can only be beneficial if they contain enough active ingredients.
However, the people always talk about a signal effect, which is still effective even in large dilutions, because the memory of the water holds the signals of the active ingredients.
The whole thing is based on belief, whereby the belief of the human being, in this respect, can be suggestively transferred to animals, whereby a suggestive healing effect takes place. A medicine can only be effective as long as it still contains active ingredients. And as far as the memory of water is concerned, it must be said that such a water memory actually exists, but that it is only of very short duration. For if water is influenced by any things, such as electrical energy, by noises and sounds, or by stirring, etc., then after a certain time it returns to its original state, namely by the environmental influences of all kinds that constantly affect it, and by the natural electromagnetism of the earth.
We have talked about this several times over the last 30 years. The believers with regard to levitated water do not want to admit that water always returns to its original state, nor that water has only a short memory, because it is again and again influenced by the entire environment in such a way that what is registered is quickly covered up and erased. A fact that also arises when any active substances, etc., are added to the water and the whole thing is diluted more and more until no active substance is contained anymore, and thus the memory disappears. Then, as a comparison in terms of homeopathy, a petrol engine, for example, can only work if it has enough petrol and oxygen injected into the carburetor. If the gasoline and the oxygen is diluted bit by bit with water or other liquids, just as the oxygen is withdrawn more and more, the engine will start to sicken or stutter, respectively, until it finally stops when enough oxygen is missing and the changed mixture is diluted too much by the other added substance and becomes useless. The same applies to an electric motor, which, when it is running, is supplied with less and less electrical energy, which ultimately brings it to a standstill. So this also means that a remedy can only be effective if it contains enough active ingredient. The less the active ingredient, the less effective the remedy will be. And this is also the case when it is claimed that water or alcohol has a memory. That is to say, it stores the signals of the active substance, which then has a healing effect. If this were indeed the case, then this effect would also have to occur with petrol, for example. But this is just as little the case with homeopathic remedies or their fluids. In fact, I have used homeopathic remedies countless times in my life for weeks and months at a time for various ailments, but without the slightest effect.
You have given good examples, and your humanity's useless attempts at homeopathy are as well known to me as those of Bach flower therapy and other similar products.
NASA's last shuttle exploded on its return flight, killing all the occupants naturally. Now another shuttle is coupled to the ISS and is supposed to return to the Earth. Do you know anything about whether this return flight will be successful?
Yes, that will be the case, albeit delayed.
The shuttle has to be repaired, which should be very dangerous.
There can be no talk of dangerousness, because this dangerousness exists only in the fantasy of NASA, which dramatizes the whole enterprise for the purpose of sensationalism, hoping that on the part of the state more finances will flow for space technology.
Typical U.S. big mouth practice, as they call their shuttle crew astronauts, although they cannot yet function in free space, which is much further out from the Earth. Already your father, Svath, explained to me that free space is only valid as such from the point where the planet's gravitational pull is completely cancelled out. Everything that is still in the gravitational field of the planet still belongs to planetary space, and so does the ISS.
That is correct. The ISS is not a space station, but a planetary space station, while the crew members are only planetary space pilots, even when they fly to the Earth's moon, which is moving in the Earth's gravitational field. Only far outside the Earth's moon, the actual free space of the world begins, in which only the gravitational field of the Sun and the galaxy is effective.
Which of course has to be seen as a whole, because the same conditions apply to every planet. But here I have one more question, which I will publish in Bulletin number 54 of December 2005 and answer in the following. Look here in the computer and see what I have written as an answer according to what Svath and Quetzal and Simyase have already explained to me. You said the same thing.
Ta reads questions and answers.
Question. What we see in the starry sky is not real, because the visible light may already be millions of light years away. How then do the Pleiaren aim at a star that is actually somewhere else, when they can travel in zero time? Wolfgang Frust, Germany.
Answer. The coordinates of all destinations are not determined according to the visible light of the stars, but according to the effective positions of the real destinations or places of destination, which have only just been precisely researched and registered, and are therefore generally, with some exceptions, not identical with the visible light objects in the universe, which in many cases no longer exist materially. Billy, there is nothing to add to your answer, because it corresponds to correctness.
Many of the stars we see in the night sky are often not simply suns, but galaxies whose light is traveling to us for millions and billions of years, even after the galaxies have long since passed. Many humans do not know this when they gaze at the stars.
That corresponds to what really is. But now I want to come to the predictions, because I have to go again soon. In addition to AIDS, traditional venereal diseases such as syphilis are spreading rapidly again. On the Iberian Peninsula, the forest fires flare up again and cause a lot of damage, which also claims human lives. Many of the fires are caused by arson by farmers and land speculators, etc. Floods follow in Iran, Romania, and Turkey due to torrential rains. Iran will make a name for itself elsewhere, in the relationship that the sealed nuclear plant in Isfahan will be unsealed and put back into operation, with the outright lie that uranium enrichment is only to be used for peaceful purposes, while the idea of nuclear weapons development is truly behind the scenes. This again brings the warmonger and autocratic, sectarian U.S. President George W. Bush, who for some time has been indulging in the obsession with the idea of attacking Iran in order to bring another Islamic state under America's thumb. It will also turn out that Australia and Tasmania will experience unusual snowfall. In Russia and Kazakhstan, the bird epidemic is spreading, which, contrary to all irresponsibly different assertions by medical science, is also transmitted from person to person by direct contact and is spreading further and further to Europe. In Iraq, there is a new form of attack and bombing, when animals are armed with explosives and bombs to be detonated in order to spread terror, Murder and destruction in this manner, following the example of the USA, which acted likewise in Vietnam, using monkeys in particular. In Italy, storms will cause great damage, also to crops, while in the south of India, unusually heavy monsoon rains will flood large areas and claim a large number of lives. Europe, Sudan, and Thailand will also be affected by very heavy rains, as will many other countries. Elsewhere in Switzerland, unusual snowfall at the height of summer will be the order of the day, falling below 1,800 meters. On 14th August, around 120 people will die when a large passenger plane crashes in which, quite unusually, all passengers and crew will be unconscious shortly after takeoff at high altitude due to lack of oxygen or frozen to death by the cold of the destroyed air conditioning system. The plane is steered by the autopilot to Greece, where it will crash. Shortly afterwards, another plane crash will be reported in Venezuela, in which around 160 humans will be killed, while in Japan there will be a 7.3 magnitude earthquake, and in Romania new storms will bring suffering and damage.
Allow me to interrupt you, please. You said that there will also be heavy rainfall in Europe. Does that also apply to Switzerland?
With Europe, I was also referring to Switzerland, which, like Germany, Austria, France, and other European countries, is being hit by extreme, continuous torrential rainstorms, which also cause an extraordinary amount of damage when mountain and landslides and debris flows spill, block or tear away roads and railway lines, causing road and rail traffic to collapse in some places. Extremely unusual flooding by torrents and otherwise harmless land streams, as well as by rivers and lakes in large parts of Switzerland and Europe, will also be recorded. Unfortunately, a number of human lives will also be lost as a result of these incidents, including in Switzerland. Everything will become even worse in the future. Now, what my father, Svath, in 1947 and Ascot in 1958 predicted, and you continued to calculate and also foresaw, according to the prophecy and prediction of my father's father, which he conveyed to 3 Earth humans about 1,000 years ago, whereupon you sent a warning letter to all European governments in 1958, which, however, found no resonance.
Rain masses in Europe, as opposed to the Iberian Peninsula, where many forest fires will rage, as you said. Yes, I can remember the letter. It was written on a Sunday at Wittekon Castle near Zurich. Director Demuth was the man in charge there at the time, and he was the one who made sure that the letters could be delivered. He also got me the addresses of the European governments. By the way, father's father is called grandfather in our country.
That is right. Ascot explained the story to me. The date of the letter was the 25th of August, 1958. You wrote it on your typewriter on the 24th of August, also the prophecy and prediction, which you adapted point by point to today's writing style, according to my father's notes on the details of Svath.
Unfortunately, I do not have a copy of those letters anymore, or I could paste it into our conversation.
That should be possible because I received an electronic record of your writing from Ascot. If you wish, I will bring it to you at my next visit, so that you can copy it and add it to our conversation today. Besides, you may not remember that in 1958 you also wrote a combination of my grandfather's prophecy prediction for the rest of the 20th century and for the 3rd millennium, which you sent to Karl Veit of the German UFO study group in Wiesbaden at that time, for publication in the UFO News, but for which there was no reply and publication. Karl Veit did not even consider it worthwhile to even give you an answer to your request, although he received and read your work, as Ascot stated during a corresponding clarification. Asket has an electronic record of this in personal custody, of which I can bring you another record for transcription if you wish. However, it may take a long time, because Asket is still very busy at the moment with a people who are friends of hers. Nevertheless, I will ask.
One more surprise, gladly. If you can also bring me the letter. Thanks. Then I will insert it here during our conversation. And of the prophecy and prediction, I will gladly make a copy if you can get it for me. I shall not lack patience.
Letter insertion, Wednesday, the 24th of August, 2005, 1:02 hours. Edward A. Meier UFO ZH. The 25th of August, 1958 Schloss UFO ZH to all European governments.
Warning to all European governments. An absolutely reliable source gives predictions for the future of Europe and the whole world, and these have nothing to do with prophecies, because they are a foresight into the real future, from which the following follows. In a few years' time, the climatic conditions in Europe and the world will be drastically changed by human fault, with extreme storms of all kinds occurring in such a manner that they will cause immense material damage to land, houses, other buildings, roads, mountains, railway tracks, torrents, streams, rivers, and lakes. Many human lives will be lost due to these climate-related upheavals and storms, because in the coming decades there will be a rapid and increasing global warming and climate change. The enormous snowfalls, hailstorms, torrential rain, European windstorms, typhoons, tornadoes, hurricanes and other storms, as well as droughts, tempests and forest fires, are generating unprecedented levels of damage and will sweep across Europe and the world, causing huge amounts of damage. Mountain torrents and field creeks will become torrential rivers. Rivers will become raging torrents, with wild waters overflowing all banks and causing huge floods, devastating the land and destroying many human achievements and livelihoods because they are built too close to the banks and in alluvial areas, etc. Soon there will also be enormous volcanic eruptions, along with tremendously extreme earthquakes and seaquakes, which will continue far into the third millennium, getting worse and worse and claiming countless human lives. At first, everything will happen in even smaller masses, but in the course of the next decades it will increase, and towards the end of the 20th century, everything will already get very badly out of control in a very unusual manner. But that does not mean then the end of the events, because when the new millennium has just arrived, nature will rebel even further and more powerfully against the environmentally destructive madness of humans, and reach a measure that will be reminiscent of the primeval times on the earth. If the coming is considered and analyzed, it is clear that humankind is largely to blame for the coming disaster and chaos as well as for the catastrophes, even if those of pathological low intelligentum and irresponsible know-it-alls and scientists will claim the opposite. Basically, overpopulation is the factor of all the evils that are to be found in global warming and environmental degradation. Open prostitution and criminality, as well as the problem of asylum seekers and neo-Nazism, will also spread and create great problems. Against this, and against all other evils, harsh, drastic measures must be taken, as well as against the world domination-addicted machinations of the USA, which cause wars all over the world, wage wars themselves, and plunge other countries into chaos and want to break and eradicate their mentality, religion, and politics. And because of the rapidly growing number of humankind, they are forced to exploit and destroy the environment and the earth more and more often, and more to meet the increasing needs of all kinds. These needs are increasing more and more with the growing number of humanity, whereby nature and the whole environment are more and more affected and destroyed, which of course also has a devastating and destructive effect on the climate. The planet itself is tormented because atomic and other explosions disturb the structure of the Earth and cause earthquakes. Waters, nature, atmosphere, and the space near the Earth are polluted. The primeval forests are destroyed and devastated for profit, and the Earth's resources are exploited irresponsibly. The recommendation of the hour and of the future is the madness of overpopulation and the resulting climate change. The destruction, devastation, chaos, and catastrophes must be stopped, and natural watercourses and floodplains restored, because only in this manner can the worst be avoided. Furthermore, the world population must be reduced by a worldwide controlled birth stop, because only through this can the increasing needs and the associated destruction ultimately be eliminated. A great deal has already been done to ensure that the predictions come true, which is why it is also necessary to take measures against this. Pollution from fossil fuel engines of all kinds and from smokestacks, etc., must be curbed as a matter of urgency, along with all other forms of environmental and air pollution. It is also of the utmost urgency that all human construction of any kind, such as houses and factories, etc., disappear from avalanche and flood-prone areas. Alluvial landscapes, etc., must be returned to nature as natural water catchment areas for floodwater. Houses and factories, etc., may no longer be built along torrents, streams, lakeshores, in or on avalanche slopes or water-prone plains, etc. In addition, extremely urgent precautions must be taken on rivers, lakes, roads, residential areas, slopes and mountains, etc., by erecting very strong and high structures in vulnerable areas where wild water can enter or where mud, snow and landslides as well as mountain slides can occur and cause damage, in order to protect houses, paths and railway lines from being washed away, flooded, buried or torn away. This will be necessary in many places, because much of the predicted chaos and catastrophes will unfortunately already be unavoidable, and time is running out. So action is needed, and this is your responsibility, because you are in government and now know what the future will bring in Europe and throughout the world. Take action before it is too late, and pass on this warning and prediction to your successors too, because they have a duty, just as you have a duty, to act within the framework of what is necessary to protect and preserve the country and everything in it, as well as life and limb and the property of the human beings. Edward A. Meier.
Then I will try my best to get it. Then we should turn back to the predictions. I think Portugal and Spain, as I said, will continue to be affected by very extensive forest fires, which unusually accumulate to a total of more than 75 due to the drought on the one hand and arson by criminal elements on the other. Central Italy will be shaken by a 4.5 magnitude quake on the 22nd of August, after which a violent typhoon will sweep over Japan and a very strong hurricane will move towards Florida, Mexico, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, causing a very large number of deaths and enormous damage and destruction.
A very large number of deaths. What do you mean by that? And one more question in between, before I forget. Do you know anything about when the bird epidemic will hit Europe?
There will be deaths that will be many hundreds and even over the number of thousands, with a certain number of humans who lose their lives not being found again. The hurricane will rage with unusual force and will also flood New Orleans, causing the city to sink into the water. Also, large areas of the other states around will be very badly affected, and everywhere will be misery, need, death. Chaos, violence, crime, criminality, rape of women and children, and looting, and aid will be extremely inadequate, which will bring enormous problems, which will also lead to a civil war-like state. Even the U.S. Disaster Relief Organization is a real disaster for its own country and is leading to chaos in this event. But this is entirely in keeping with the magnanimity of the government and that part of the people that is on fire for its leaders and their vassals. A real disgrace for the United States, when one considers that in other and even more powerful disaster areas of the world. Such things of insulting failure have never happened to such an extent as will be the case in the American disaster areas. Everything is becoming a great national disgrace to U.S. America, which will show its true face from that side as it really is behind the I am your friend mask of the U.S. government and all its supporters and like-minded people, as well as with the felons and criminals. They are more willing to impose the death penalty, to live in selfishness, to disrespect their neighbor, to steal, murder, and wage wars in foreign countries to spread death, torture, murder, rape, terror, and destruction throughout the world. To develop into true human beings and to cultivate true humanity is foreign to them. And in addition, it must be said that a great deal will be sectarian in nature, like the first and second election of George W. Bush as U.S. President, which was mainly due to the evangelicans. This fundamentalist racist sect, along with other like-minded ones in the USA, forms a great power and is a great danger for the non-Christian and especially for the Islamic world. And because a lot of black and poor people live in New Orleans, who are a thorn in the side of the racist U.S. President Bush and those who cheer for him, it will be that the otherwise already lacking organization of disaster relief will be all the more sloppy, and Bush will only care about it hypocritically for the sake of his office. Beside the many dead, tens of thousands of people will also be homeless, because the immense destruction is mainly related to human residential buildings and achievements, etc. You and Quetzal, you both already spoke at the 230th official contact conversation on the 11th of October 1989 about what will happen when the catastrophe occurs. Look here, in the new contact conversation volume No. On page 62, it says the following.
New Orleans is sinking deeper and deeper into the ground and is already about 2 meters below sea level, as you explained to me. Also, the whole area around it is slowly but surely drowning in the sea.
That corresponds to correctness, which is why New Orleans is in danger of total flooding and destruction if the storms and waters become too violent. What you said then will actually happen now, and it will be one of the biggest catastrophes ever to hit the USA before and after the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. But this catastrophe will not be the last, because in the course of time, much more powerful and worse ones will follow, not only in the USA, but everywhere in the world, and so also in Europe, to which your fatherland belongs. But the USA will be hit by hurricanes several times in the near future, just as typhoons in the Far East will make a name for themselves. You warned the European governments in 1958, and already then you pointed out the coming disaster and declared that countermeasures had to be taken. But you were only ridiculed, and your warning went unheeded, which has been avenging itself for quite some time and will continue to do so. And as for the bird epidemic, it has already been caused by wild birds, but chickens and humans have been spared so far.
So the big disaster is actually going to come over New Orleans and the country and the other affiliated states. And maybe it will be good if humankind finally learns what is really going on with U.S. America and how many of the people there are true, namely not friends and not real human being, but only selfish, self-considered and irresponsible towards their fellow human beings, from which all those U.S. Americans have to suffer, who as a minority disagree with the criminal machinations of the government, as well as their contributors and the fellow howlers from the pro-government people. You then went on to say that the bird epidemic is spreading more and more into Europe. but that this only refers to the spread to chickens, while wild birds are already bringing the disease into Europe, or have done so. Then there is another question, which we have already talked about. But you said at the time, it was a purely private conversation, that migraines are inherited, but you said nothing more about that. May I ask what the answer should have been?
Regarding the bird epidemic, that was the meaning of my words. And what I apparently forgot to explain regarding migraine is this. Through a genetic change in chromosome 1, the suffering of migraine is actually hereditary. This hurricane will be followed in a few weeks by another, even more powerful one called Rita, which will reach the U.S. at Galveston, Houston, Port Arthur, and Morgan City. It will cause fear, terror, and chaos when millions of people are on the run. Hurricane Katrina will cause tremendous damage, devastation, and destruction, but will claim far fewer lives than U.S. America has seen in the past, such as the earthquake in San Francisco in mid-April 1906, which killed about 7,000 people, and the hurricanes in southeast Texas in early September 1900, which devastated the Texas port city of Galveston and almost the entire Texas Gulf Coast, and claiming some 8,000 lives. The next unusually powerful hurricane, Rita, will, as explained, have a center speed of about 300 kilometers per hour. Dam failures will partially submerge New Orleans again. In your homeland, in the canton of Wallace, a 10-year-old girl from Cameroon gives birth to a child, which will cause a sensation in Switzerland. Then, the humans of the Earth have still not learned to listen to your warnings regarding the use of propellants, etc. So the southern ozone hole is expanding again this year to such an extent that it will cover a larger area than the entire expanse of Europe. In Iraq, namely in Baghdad, a Shiite pilgrimage procession will cause mass panic, which will kill about 1,000 humans. The reason for the panic will be a deliberately generated rumor that suicide bombers are in the pilgrim masses to detonate the bombs in them. But this will be a deliberate lie to trigger the mass panic, which will claim many lives, which unfortunately will succeed. Then a huge typhoon will be reported again, which will pass over Taiwan towards China, claiming lives and causing destruction. This typhoon will be followed by a second one of enormous strength, which will also sweep over the south of Japan, and which will also be such that it will cause great destruction and claim human lives. Then, in the first days of September, a passenger plane crashes on Sumatra just seconds after takeoff, claiming the lives of around 170 human lives. During the same period, an extraordinary and strange event in Austria will claim around 10 lives when a transport helicopter flies high above a cable car and loses a load hanging below it. A concrete container weighing around 800 kilograms. As a heavy projectile, the container collides with a moving cable car gondola, which crashes to the ground and from which the people are ejected. The force of the container impact causes the ropes of the cable car to vibrate strongly, causing 2 further gondolas to crash, from which the passengers are also ejected. Then it must be said that large parts of southern France have been hit by violent rainstorms, and thus also by floods, while in Spain 2 tornadoes will cause major damage in the Barcelona area, followed by an earthquake of magnitude 4.9 on the 8th of September, the center of which will be in the Chamonix area of France and will also affect parts of Switzerland. Weeks later, Portugal will be hit by an earthquake, and a seaquake of magnitude 7.3 will occur near Papua New Guinea. Then a seaquake off Sumatra, while in the Pacific there will be new violent typhoons which will bring destruction and loss of life as far as the Philippines and China. Switzerland will also experience new severe storms, and in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli occupation terror will come to an end on the 11th of September, after 38 years. Then it will become known that the completely irresponsible U.S. President George W. Bush is planning nuclear attacks on terrorist organizations and on states which he, in exuberant fear and cowardice, sees as a danger to the USA. Then, on the 13th of September, a very serious series of suicide bombings will take place in Baghdad, in which some 170 humans will die and hundreds will be seriously injured. The attack is being carried out by the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda in retaliation for the massacres of insurgents carried out by the U.S. military and Iraqi forces. And the closer the time comes when the new constitution for Iraq is to be adopted, the more attacks are increasing, which will cost hundreds of lives, because as many Shiites as possible are to be killed, who are on the side of the government and the occupying power USA. This will also be the prelude for Al-Qaeda to openly oppose the pro-American and pro-government Shiites and threaten them with war. Further, it results in Ireland that the religious terror between Protestants and Catholics flares up again, namely by riots of the Protestants. Greece is hit by several earthquakes, and in South Asia and Southeast Asia, a meningitis epidemic claims over 1,000 lives. In South India, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, and in Romania, heavy rainstorms with large floods will occur and claim a larger number of lives. Then in Ireland, the IRA terrorist organization is officially laying down its arms, while another severe typhoon will be reported, claiming lives and causing great destruction in Vietnam and China. At the same time, there is an earthquake in Peru, a huge bushfire in South Africa, and a huge forest fire in the USA near Los Angeles. And now the Earth's climate is changing faster and faster as a result of the environmental destruction caused by the Earth humans. And now it is also so far that the rapid climate change process can no longer be stopped, which means that the natural disasters, the storms of all kinds, cannot be stopped, nor can the melting of the ice of the Arctic and parts of the Antarctic and the glaciers. All evils in every respect will henceforth become ever more powerful, more incalculable, and now, in fact, unstoppable. This will now finally also be determined by the authoritative earthly scientists, whereby it is now, however, too late to turn back, because the process can no longer be stopped, and earthly humankind alone is to blame for this through its destructive fury. A reversal for the better and to prevent the process of destruction should have taken place in the 1950s at the latest, when you enlightened and warned the governments of the world through your letters to them, but for which you reaped only ridicule and ingratitude. At that time, however, there would still have been a chance to prevent the worst from happening. But this is no longer possible now because since then, everything has developed so far that nature is now and from now on rebelling so tremendously that everything so far is far surpassed. Up to here, my friend, I will give you the predictions. But now it is time for me. Goodbye, Edward.
Take care, Ptah. See you next time.